What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are back with some more Detroit Lions breaking news. We're back with another episode of Lions Latest, going through the latest Detroit Lions news, and it is official. Brock Wright, he's coming back to Detroit. So let's get it started. Welcome, everybody, to the video. Glad you guys are here. And yes, we're back with some Lions news, man. Shout out to my man Chef for sending me this because I probably would have missed this. I just uploaded the Kindle Vilder video. But as soon as I did that, I go to X to actually look for something else. And I saw this message, and shout out to you. He sent it over to me that the Detroit Lions are matching the offer from the San Francisco 49ers. So to pull this back a little bit, we've done multiple videos on this situation. So I won't try to talk too much about Brock right here specifically and his play, because I've kind of already dove into that. However, going back a little bit, he was a restricted free agent, and the Detroit Lions decided to place the right of refusal tender on Brock Wright, which essentially meant that he could go negotiate with other teams in free agency, and if he signed an offer sheet with another team in free agency, the Detroit Lions would then get the opportunity to match that offer. If they decided not to match that offer, he would go to the other team. But if they decided to match that offer, he would be brought back to Detroit on that deal. And that's exactly what the Lions decided to do with the San Francisco 49ers, who offered him 3 years, $12 million, which is definitely a bump just in terms of per year. That'd be $4 million per year. But it could be lined up a little bit differently, actually, in terms of how the cap number is going to look. I guess we'll get the details on that a little bit later. Just because it is $4 million per year doesn't mean it's actually going to line up as a $4 million cap hit per year. So I'm very curious to see how that lines up. With the Lions' current financial space, this could make sense to be a little bit more on the front-loaded side if the Lions were looking at it, hey, we're not going to make many more big free agency splash moves. So this is a spot where we can actually front-load this a little bit, kind of lighten it up in the back end, maybe make it a little bit easier to get out of this contract a little bit earlier if we wanted to. But typically how these are set up, we see it lower cap number at the beginning. Second year, it's going to rise. And then third year, there's probably going to be a little bit of an out within that contract. He's probably for sure going to be locked in for the first year and probably the second year with the Lions. So making this move definitely locks in Brock Wright as like, hey, this dude's making the roster. And it seems like the Lions are okay with that, deciding to match this offer. What's so interesting about this situation to me is that when San Francisco decided to make this 3-year, $12 million offer to Brock Wright, is that they had a couple weeks ago let go of Charlie Warner, the tight end, and let him go sign with the Atlanta Falcons. So what's interesting about this is that he signed with Atlanta on a 3-year, $12 million deal. And Charlie was not a player that was typically used whatsoever offensively in terms of as a receiver for San Francisco. Just go look at the numbers. He had like 3 receptions this past season. He was not used in that form for San Fran. Instead, he was a very big special teams piece. And I think what's interesting about this is I talked about how I think San Francisco could be looking at the value of special teams ability. And they could see that maybe, hey, Brock Wright is a better special teams piece. He's also a guy that played 340 snaps on special teams this past season in comparison to Brock Wright, who did miss some time, but allowed 170 snaps on special teams this past season. So first thing is interesting is that maybe they could potentially see more value in Brock Wright in just terms of similar roles that they may play, because Brock Wright has typically been a very big piece for the Lions on special team, on the kick return unit, but also on the field goal kick team. But last season, we started to see his value start to kind of come along the punt coverage team as well, where he took 44 snaps. That role has started to improve and become a little bit bigger there for Brock Wright. So that's one side of it. But the second side of it could also be that the San Francisco 49ers valued Brock Wright's offensive ability a little bit more as well than Charlie Warner, who signed with the Atlanta Falcons. Maybe in the receiving side, which clearly he has more production, even though his production is nowhere near being crazy. This past season, 13 receptions on 14 targets for 91 yards. Again, he didn't miss some time. But we all know as Lions fan that, hey, for Brock Wright, while his route tree is going to be pretty limited, the ways that you're going to utilize him may not be huge within the receiving game. You may put him out there on some of those 12 personnel sets to more so look for the matchup with Sam Laporta than Brock Wright. When you throw his direction, he's typically coming down with the football. He's been a vertical threat in line that could just push the seam, and usually it's like, hey, when you least expect it, that guy's running by people, because he does have adequate straight line speed that can be threatening. And underneath, when you throw his direction, he's typically coming down with the football. Though again, it's in a kind of limited route tree. He's typically going to catch it if it's thrown his way. And I think the number that does stand out to me, if you just want to put numbers to this, is the pass rating when targeted over the last 3 seasons with the Lions, right? So this past season, 117 on those 14 targets. The year before, it was 145 with 18 receptions, 23 targets, 200-plus yards, and 4 touchdowns. And even a year before that, on 12 receptions for 17 targets, he still carried a 104 pass rating when targeted. So he does bring more value as a receiver than a player like Charlie, which could be San Francisco saying, hey, we see more value as a receiver. And as Lions fans, again, it's usually nothing that's pretty as a Lions fan, but he can absolutely attack the seam. He's made some awesome one-handed grabs that are not looking like, hey, this is the most athletic grab I've seen, but it's reliable hands when it's thrown his direction. He typically finds a way to just come down with the football. And then, of course, the LA Chargers touchdown, which was, hey, we have everybody out here to make you think there is no way we're throwing this football, but Brock Wright is out there, and it's slick because he has some vertical speed, and he usually comes down with the football, but everybody else is like, he's probably not going to get you're probably not throwing the ball here. Here goes Brock Wright up the seam, scores a touchdown, and it was a huge touchdown in a back-and-forth game. So, to me, I look at this as the San Francisco 49ers could be valuing and saying, hey, he's got more offensive ability than just purely special teams value, because while he does play special teams, he's played less snaps there than a guy like Charlie did. But then there's also the aspect of, hey, as a blocker. Now, we know as Lions fans the flexibility that he brings as a blocker, in line, playing wide. He can play as a move tight end, get out in space and block, but he also can be an in-blind blocker, not only as a run blocker, but also as a pass protector, which is an area which I think he's been pretty solid for the Lions, is specifically pass protection. So there's also that value. And then again, flexibility. Guys lined up at fullback for us. So I just think that it's interesting that they would have so much interest in a guy like Brock Wright rather than Charlie, who's played more special team snaps. I think it speaks to their value that they could see in a guy that can actually be more valuable offensively, whether that's as a blocker, but also as a receiver. I will say this last point, that just because he was an undrafted free agent and that's his background, the athletic side may not blow you away with Brock Wright. What you do have to also keep in mind is the perspective of you were going through the draft and you were just looking at, hey, we'll just go add a later round pick that has a similar body type, maybe not much of a receiving threat, but we know that he can add special teams value, is the fact that Brock Wright, it's been a progressive build for Brock Wright. It's not just you're getting the guy that you got when he was a rookie with Lions. You're getting a guy that has now done this for multiple seasons. So just finding that draft pick, it might be there. You might be able to find that guy that can add that value, and as time goes on, continue to expand his role as special teams, continue to expand his reliability as a receiving target that's dropping less passes. Maybe he's adding a little more value, and you're really getting a sense of what can we actually ask of him in terms of his route tree and his trust with the quarterback. You might be able to find that player that can grow into those abilities as time goes on, but Brock Wright is ready-made in that sense. You're not having to look for that, and I think that's the value that the Lions saw, and I think that's the value that San Francisco sees, is that, hey, we're trying to win right now. We're capable of winning right now. Let's go get someone that we trust offensively. And I think that's the value that both of those teams can see, because tight end we know is one of the toughest positions to learn. It's one of the toughest positions to immediately have success in the NFL, regardless of where you're taken in the draft. And while Brock Wright will never be a huge receiving threat within the NFL, what he is become a reliable piece at all different categories. And that's one of those things that even if you find the body type, can you find the FBI? Can you find the run blocking and pass protection technique? Is he going to have that down? Where is that going to go, and how long is it going to take to get there? And that's one thing that Brock Wright has built within this offense and on special teams, being able to continuously expand within this Lions offense and his value. And that's one of those things that in the draft that not only is it weird to find a body type like that now, because most players are flex tight ends, they split out into the slot. Those are the guys that get drafted. Now you're also looking at a guy that has to bring along kind of that tough nose and the dirty work. You now have to find that player, and those players are not easy to find, just in general. And Brock Wright has already built along. He's already grown within that area. You're asking now for a draft pick to start to kind of bring that along. And the later you wait into the draft, the harder it's going to be to find that piece. And earlier you're going to draft, you're not necessarily finding exactly what Brock Wright brings to the table. And if you look at San Francisco's depth chart with a guy like Cameron Latu, who they did not see play this past season, but a former third-round pick behind George Kittle, who looks like more of a receiving threat specifically, is that you could see real value in all phases of the game. And I think it speaks to the value that not only San Francisco saw in Brock Wright, but the value that the Lions see in Brock Wright. And we know for sure the Lions do value special teams. We've seen that with a lot of their re-signings, guys like Jalen Reese-Maybin, for example. But also the Detroit Lions have valued kind of these, hey, look, they may not do much in the receiving game, but they're going to be reliable run blockers. They open up 12 personnel, 13 personnel usage. You want to put James Mitchell, Shane Zylstra. You want to get that combination with Sam Laporta. They do bring value, and we could play these heavier personnel sets. And the Lions see value in that, but also in value of FBI. I will give credit to this sense as well. Lions utilize a lot of packages where Jared Goff will get out in single back looks. The Lions will spread out the defense, and then they'll make an adjustment based on what the defense shows, and those guys will crash in, and they'll set up in line. And you do have to speak to the value there, because if Goff maybe sees a look that isn't going to immediately bring everybody in line, kind of condense the formation, he would probably have a responsibility as a receiver. Again, the route tree may not be deep, but there's probably like a little dig route or something that he's going to be set to run. or maybe a little quick route. However, when he sets it in, now all of a sudden assignments change. So it does speak to that FBI that he brings as well. So as a Lion, you can understand it. I mean, the Lions went out at one point and signed Garrett Griffin, who had 5 receptions in 5 years with the New Orleans Saints. And he had connections to Dan Campbell, but the Lions signed Garrett Griffin. He didn't ultimately end up making the team. They signed Josh Hill at one point. The Lions have always valued special teams pieces and pieces like this for tight end that are flexible, in-line, slot, wide, can play fullback and block, run block, and pass protection. Now special teams value, but also he's a reliable target when he's thrown to. He is like the Detroit Lion as a tight end. He is Dan Campbell's tight end because you know when you throw it to him, he's probably going to come down with the football, even though that's not going to be his prototypical use. Is $4 million per year too much money to pay? I don't think so, but it depends how you look at it. If you look at other guys with a similar amount per season, for example, you could look at a guy like Foster Moreau, who has done much more as a receiving option over the last couple of seasons. He's just been more involved in terms of receiving production. He's played a similar amount of snaps on special teams to Brock Wright, and he's played him in a lot of the same areas, so there's that. But then there's also aspect of kind of the inflation within the NFL, which is, hey, as years go on, these contracts continue to get higher and higher because that salary cap continues to rise. And when he got his deal was heading into 2023, Brock Wright is getting his deal heading into 2024. So they're just natural inflation, and based on what the projections are for example, like Spotrac, if you use them, we're looking at a 1.5% is what that $4 million cap it would be towards the cap it if it's $4 million for this upcoming season. We know it won't be that like that. It'll be set up a little bit differently. I'm sure it won't be just $4 million. But if it was $4 million in 2025, now that drops down to 1.4% of the cap it. So that's just the inflation naturally that's there. So does the $4 million make sense? I would say yes, because the Lions find value here, but it's also the aspect of the Lions aren't the only team that sees value in a guy like Brock Wright, and we could see that there. But this definitely locks him in for the next couple of seasons, really locks in the Lions tight end position. James Mitchell, who I really like, I thought he came on this past season, not only as a receiver, but as a pass protector. Shane Zylstra, who we did not see this past season, who really doesn't bring much value as a run blocker specifically just because of his frame of a receiving target, but he became a very reliable target for Jared Goff just in the season before in 2022, but also in activities before the injury in training camp, unfortunately. So the Lions have a lot of depth at tight end. Doesn't mean they can't add to it, but it definitely says that, hey, we know who our two guys are for sure, right? We know that Sam Laporta is going to be here. We know that Brock's going to be in here. And now it's a battle for tight end 3. Is it going to be James Mitchell? James, can you continue to add to more versatility of I'm a blocker, but I'm also a receiving target, but I'm also a really good pass protector? You saw the ability there. Is it going to be Shane Zylstra, who showed like, hey, look me, I'm a big-time receiving target. Can I add a little bit of blocking upside? Typically, he between 3 to 4 tight ends, so there's going to be a real battle for that final position, especially if they throw a new body into that mix. But I think it does leave that, hey, you could still go get a big-time receiving threat. If you were to surprise everybody, go get a big receiving threat at the tight end position, I wouldn't say it'd be shocking because Brock Wright doesn't right now bring that to the table. So I think it leaves everything open in terms of adding to the tight end position, but it definitely locks the Lions with their 1-2 tight ends, their 1-2 punch. You know who's going to be on the roster. Now it's a battle for 3 and potentially 4 with his size, and he's a little bit different than a lot of the tight ends that you see in the draft. I mean, there's guys that can bring similarities, but even if you went to a Sanders, right, a Sanders still doesn't bring the reliability of a run blocker at this point that Brock Wright could to the table. He has the traits there, but it's not all there right now. Obviously, Brock Bowers, he's definitely more like a receiver than maybe even a tight end. And then once you start to work through the draft, Eric All, Cade Stover, you start to work through the draft, you get a lot of maybe they're slimmer athletically and they have to really fill out their frame, become a much more reliable run blocker. Maybe it's a player that, hey, they have the receiving ability, but the run blocking ability just isn't really there. Maybe they are a good run blocker, but they haven't brought the reliability to their hands. So for the tight end position, Brock Wright is unique, and he's going to have different value based on the team that you're asking for. But if you're asking for a reliable, well-versed special teams, offense, receiving ability, run blocking, Brock Wright checks a lot of those boxes, and I'm not really surprised the Lions brought him back because they have always seen value in this type of player, but also in special team. And he is back, and we have seen the growth. We've seen the Detroit Lions bring him in as an undrafted free agent. He had to battle and work his way, and he's continued over and over to be a reliable, consistent piece within this offense. And now we really get to see the value that the Lions put in Brock Wright with a 3-year deal that they were willing to match. But this is a Lion, a guy that, hey, you're a core piece because of what he can do, but also you've worked your way and battled every single season to make the roster. He is one of those guys that has brought that to the table. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you, Prop, for watching. Welcome back, Brock Wright.